New York. My question is for Poonam Katuria. You talked a lot about the way in which the Hindu fundamentalist right has taken discourses of the leftist feminist movement, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the failure of engagement, the kind of incommensurability between the feminist movement, the women's movement in India, and I would say throughout the world, and its disengagement and often kind of allergicness to religion, and what that disengagement and that incommensurability does in constructing what I would say are, I don't know, something like particular consumers, constructing women into particular consumers that are devoid of cultural and religious contexts, and the kind of harmful ideologies that are constructed by this anti-religious movement, and the reaction that those ideologies have, the reaction by the kind of Hindu right or right fundamentalist religious movements to the leftist and women's movement. I don't know if that's clear, if that kind of makes sense, but
okay. Part of other movements for land rights, for this thing, and the way we saw feminist engagement in those was how to imbue them with, infuse them with feminist thinking and ideology. But our active engagement with those movements hasn't been there, and partly because I think the women's movement started by saying religion is a main source of oppression for us, and so it's sort of tried, and so it's actually, we have the term called secular feminism, which is, to me, never makes sense, but there is something like that. So I think that is where I think we have to do a rethink, and we have to see how we incorporate religion in a secular manner into our discourse and dialogue and ideology. I think that's something that churning has to go on, and that's why we haven't engaged with a huge number of women, and women who kept Karwa Chauth for us were like, oh, you women are misled, false consciousness kind of a thing. So I think that's the kind of thing that we are coming to, and learning to dialogue on these fronts. Whenever we have engaged with women in right-wing movements, and not much engagement has happened, I must say, they are very much with us on issues of violence against women, of how men can oppress, how women do not have shares of property. So all of that sort of comes in. But moment you talk of in terms of a secular nature or getting Muslim women in, the entire discourse changes, because the Muslims then, in this case, Hindu fundamentalism has majorly been against the Muslim community, and they become immediately the other, and then it gets into how the Indian government has been trying to pacify them, placate them with, sort of all kinds of, they have personal laws where they can have 4 wives, whereas, if you look at the whole data, the rate of bigamy in Hindus is slightly higher than the rate of bigamy among Muslims in that sense. Number of children also more or less the same. But somehow this whole thing promotes itself, and there's a whole lot of myth. For example, Narendra Modi will go and say, "Hum 4, hamare 25," like we 4 and our 25. It's as though, like, and then it's as though there are as many, but there are only so many women they can get married to. So that is never taken into consideration, and everyone sort of promotes that as though the Muslim population is rising in a big way. And this has been compounded by the fact that there has been an increased separation of the Hindu and Muslim communities in the way of where they are staying, in their interactions with each other. So in Gujarat, for example, there's a place called Juhapura, which is the biggest Muslim ghetto in Asia now. So I'm saying, so this separation actually increases the process of creating myths, because you don't know them. And so that's been a major issue for us.
And your question has been answered. Yeah, you've answered it.
Madhuji, thank you very much for asking this question. This question of women politicians is crucial, I think, in the context of Nepal, because there are, first of all, there are very few women in the political institutions, and even if they are there, they are not in the leadership positions, and often the questions comes up as to why they are not there. And then actually a Sanam fellow, Santi Uprade. She had done a very interesting research on that regarding the like woman politician. Her argument was that the political space, whether in parliament or somewhere else, is a very masculine space, and like men, like it's almost like all men club, and after the like the day is over, they gather for drinks, etc. Whereas the woman politician, she needs to go back to her house and cook, and all that. So it's a very difficult position to be in. And then one thing that is expected, if a woman politician is doing very well, like someone might praise her by saying that you are like a man. Like why should she be like a man? Like why can't be she like a woman? And then you're like so that kind of thing might be used to like praise her. And then and regarding other politicians, like often the word charitrahin, meaning characterless, that I've seen in the print. There was this woman minister called Sujata Koiral. Actually, by the way, I'm not fond of her at all because of her policies, and I think she had, I don't know, there's no way to prove it. Many people think she had taken bribes and all that. So actually, and because of her politics, I'm not really fond of her. I'm not a supporter at all. But what I found problematic is the way she was being portrayed in the media because she was a woman. No matter, because many men also do crazy things and things. So she was described, and her name is not Sujata, she's Kujata, like, so that was kind of, another thing is like she's charitrahin, like characterless. So when you call a woman a characterless, that's a kind of, again, the kind of word dalal, in the case of men, that creates a kind of a foreclosure. In the same way, when you call a woman charitrahin, that creates another kind of foreclosure. You cannot do any meaningful discussion after that. So that kind of representation.
Thank you. Let's have another round of questions. Yes, so we'll start from the last row and then the mic will come forward.
This is not so much a question. I wanted just to respond to the Poonamji's answer to the question that this gentleman posed from Mexico. I think I would want to disagree a bit here. I don't think we can say that the women's movements in India have not engaged so much on the question of religion and women in India when we are talking in the context of the Hindu right, because if at least in the last 25-30 years, there are quite a few feminist historians and literary theorists who have time and again tried to problematize this whole notion of Nari Shakti, which is very central to Hindu ideology and the entrenched patriarchal nature of that. Where does this Shakti come from, and does that empower Hindu women in any way? I think there's been a lot of discussion on that. I think the problem to me is mainly who is discussing it and to what extent and to whom is... Sorry. I mean, there need to be more dialogues on people who are, as Dina said, actually have been challenging certain comfort zones in our thinking. And, so there's not much dialogue between people who have been problematizing and challenging these comfort zones in our thinking and the others, activists, researchers, other peoples in the movement. So, because we keep talking about this divide between activism and academics, I think this is one area where I would think it really clearly shows up that so much work has gone up into questioning this whole Hindu ideology of Nari Shakti, and how much of that has actually gone into mainstream discourse and dialogue in people who are in the movement. That I thought I would like to make this point. Thank you.
Okay.
Let's have a few more questions. Yeah.
Well, I don't know whether I am asking or I am adding something. Everybody has limited knowledge. No one is full scholar in any area. So whatever Sanjeev said, Nepal is the leading country in the sense the women's representation in the parliament. Nepal was among the 17 countries five years ago, and still within the 25 countries in the world having women's participation in the parliament. This is the, like, we have to have some knowledge about politics. So, but we don't have local election, so without local election we cannot say what percentage women are participating. This is one thing. Another thing about the Poonam's, like I didn't attend actually her session, but according to the question, I smell something. When we talk about Hindu fundamentalism, why don't we talk about the Christian, conversion in South Asia, missionary. Hindu never do the missionary work in the world. They don't change the religion, like anyone's religion with interest, with any other things. So when we talk about the Hindu fundamentalism, we have to talk about the missionary in the world, which is making a crucial like a point of fighting in South Asia. That is somehow, I think, Middle East is also like there are different type of fundamentalism in the world, Islam, maybe Hinduism, maybe Christianity, but we talk one side, but we forget other side. Thank you.
Let's take a few more questions, and then I think the panelists will be able to respond to. Yes, we've had two. Somebody, somebody. Yes, you've got another question. Yeah, go ahead. And you, all sides.
My question is to Sanjeev. You described in your presentation about king and their masculinity and their description in the history. मुझे ये जानना था कि a few years ago a Nepali king shot his all relatives in an incident. So what was the reaction of common Nepali person towards that incident? Before, Nepal is a secular country, but before it was a Hindu Rashtra, and king को माना जाता है विष्णु का अवतार. तो वो masculinity और भगवान ऐसा कुछ description है क्या उसमें?
Very good. We'll take one question right here, the lady in front, and then we'll get the panelists to respond.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. It was a bit heavy, and I'm still trying to digest it. But it was a very good discourse and debate. And I was wondering, considering the post-2015 development, sustainable development agenda, and and setting the global symposium, what would be the sunams or maybe the presenters, one of the recommendation, maybe for the call for action. So that I would like to know. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll invite the panelists, and as they start speaking, I just want to remind you that we are all here to see how do we deepen our understanding of masculinity. The presenters, through their presentation, they've given you a rich outline of how you can take an individual, very specific local case and do an analysis to see how masculinity plays itself out through language, through images, through positioning, and then the challenging questions that have been come out. So we are here to understand, no matter where we go, can we really do a good analysis from the masculinity lens. So,
Yeah, questions that were addressed to me. Like first, only my part of, because Dhanaprasadji's questions were directed to, I think, about Hindutva, about which I won't talk about because Poonam was making the presentation. Regarding the representation of women in Nepali parliament, and my question, my perspective, Dhanaji, was, not only it is not only the question of participation, but my point I was trying to make is that there are very few of them in the leadership positions. That is what I was trying to say. The second thing what you said is that Nepal is better in comparison to other SAARC countries. I mean, I'm always scared of such kind of argument. Where it leads is that it might be true. I bow down to your superior knowledge regarding this, but my thing is, when you, this kind of thing, this kind of argument I've heard many times, this kind of leads us towards some kind of comparative study. The comparative study, the problem is that you can always say that, I am bad, but you are worse. So I am better. Because I am better, I don't need to change. That kind of argument can lead from this. So this I find problematic. That's the only thing. Regarding Sandeep, I'm glad to, you said you are from Maligaon. I am also from Maligaon, but I'm from Maligaon of Kathmandu, that's where I live. Regarding, the interesting question was, of course, king being the avatar of Vishnu. If you look at the Hindu mythology, I mean, the masculinity, there are different masculinities of different gods. Vishnu has a very, I would say, very urban kind of masculinity, very civilized kind of god, as different from, we come from the country of Shiva, Kathmandu, Nepal, Shiva is not a civilized god, he visits, all the Arya Ghats and puts, ash. So there is always a discussion also of this point that, he might be a kind of maybe he came outside the Aryan pantheon and something like that. Regarding Dipendra and the royal massacre, as you said, the kings are represented as, avatars of Vishnu and etc. But after that killing, and I was looking at the newspapers and all that, some of the representations were sympathetic, because people thought, and many still continue to think, that Dipender did not commit it. There was some conspiracy behind it. So that was one kind of representation. But in the another kind of representation, where the newspapers or reporters, etc., who believed in this, so he was presented in a very demonic ways, as if, with having horns, etc. So that again, the question of masculinity, as if he has lost that proper masculinity, because there are different kinds of masculinity, and each society defines its own model of proper masculinity, as if he has fallen down from that proper masculinity and has become demonic.
Feminist academicians and activists have engaged with religion in a certain way, but that has been from the point of questioning. So that has put a huge number of people out, because the moment you question, you put people on the defensive, and particularly those who are not necessarily being mobilized or who are not part of our activism in a very direct kind of a way. So all I'm saying is, when we are in this way, I think I'm talking of the engagement with popular religion in a manner that you still decide that religion has a space in our life, in people's lives, and how do I now make it a positive force rather than a subversive force. So but I completely agree with what you're saying. I think Panditji's question is, to me, not relevant, in the sense that I'm talking of Hindu fundamentalism, and so there's no space for talking about Christian fundamentalism. If I want to talk about it, that is where I'll talk about it in a different way. And at the same time, the response, for example, every time on television, people are told about, the BJP is told about the Muslim riots, then they say, okay, you had Sikh riots. So the entire dialogue breaks down. So we are not talking about what you said, Sanjeev, about like, if I am bad, you are worse kind of a thing. That's not the discussion about. So I think I'm just presenting one scenario. Yes, Neena. Yes.
That point about feminists engaging, and of course, yes, there's been a lot of academic work, and I'm going to speak from the viewpoint of Bangladesh, not India. And of course, activists are perfectly aware of the issues. I think certainly what I see in Bangladesh is that, and I think somebody mentioned it, quite a lot of hostility or fear in engaging, and I think that's Poonam's point, in engaging seriously with women who might also be religious, because of this larger, older anxiety over how religion is at the source of oppression. And I really will say that some of us, when we talk to other feminists, activists, get dismissed in various kinds of ways as either apologists for Islam or diasporic intellectuals or people who really aren't working in the trenches. And that's a problem that I don't think more research will, solve. But I think there needs to be much more reflection on the part of why there is so much hostility toward religion. So I just want to leave that there.
Lakshman, you'd like to say something more? There was a specific question to Sanam.
Yeah, so where I'll start with, of which I didn't talk in the beginning, is the issue of how masculinity is understood and is supposed or put on certain people to be understood. So actually the whole Sanam issue, actually the network came out of, and now I'm being politically incorrect here, came out of the whole Meninges movement in South Asia. The response was the way the masculinities was not politicized as much as it should have been within the global Meninges group. And that got us to think that then there should be some critical reflection of that movement, and then we need to come out with a certain understanding when it comes to looking at masculinities in South Asia region, given the complexity of the issue and the multivariate sort of approach to looking at the such and complex issue needs to be acknowledged, and a simple equation cannot lead us to the issue of addressing gender justice as such. So that actually led us to form a separate group with Sanam as a network, where we looked into all these issues, where nationalism, the fundamentalism, it's not to blame certain nation or certain nationalism or certain religion as such. The thing that we are really trying to do is that we need to go beyond this nationalistic point of or view around certain issues. We need to go beyond politicizing this, how nation as an state, as an variable within this equation depoliticizes, or even further, sort of puts under the carpet a lot of issues that needs to be brought in when it comes to issues like gender justice and the reason. So that's what Sanam has been doing, and we strongly say, feel that yes, we don't any kind of fundamental, either Hindu, either whatever, either it's an individual fundamentalism even. So it should go up to that level as well, and we need to address those issues. And slightly responding to the post 2015 and what's our call is still the same, saying that we think gender equality now has come up again, which is we acknowledge that, and further we are saying that, and that will go in the call for action as well. I'm part of the call for action group. I'll make sure that this comes out explicitly, is to make sure that engaging boys and men becomes the one of the prime approaches to look into. But then working with boys and men not as simplistic phrase, but an approach which requires multiple rigorous understanding and deepening of the way that is taken forward. And also to look into, make sure that it's a right-based language is there. For example, taking of violence as a political issue rather than just simplistic violence as in word. I think that's what we want to see, and that's what we aspire to sort of contribute from our discussion.
Finally, I think there are two persons here associated with Sanam who may want to. Did you have your hand up, Razak? And yes. So we'll just take a few comments or queries from Sanam Fellow.
Yeah, just we have been exploring these notions of religiosity at South Asian level very deeply in our course. As Lakshman just mentioned, the culture, religion, and masculinities. And our dilemma was also the same as it has been raised here. To my experience coming from Pakistan and from a particularly place mainly extremely affected rather, by religious extremism, I can understand that how this religious landscape or this sense of religion has been changing over these years. So even when I recall my childhood or boyhood, religion was not the way we are experiencing it today. So we have to look at the spaces that are available for engagement. They are very much people and intellectual and activists who've been raising and trying to engage with religion and religious groups. But our experiences, maybe it's not generalizable, that the space for engagement, particularly with the emergence of new sense of religion, more politicized with the new emerging dogmas, it's becoming very difficult to engage with them. It's so intimidating and so violent in all its deliberations, and sometimes that you find yourself very, helpless to engage and to at least to intervene and to find that things that this is something that can be discussed.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Anybody else for the last? Suhail, you wanted to say something? No? Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank you all for your patience and your deep attention and the questions that were raised. And I was thinking that you've heard these wonderful presentations, that I hope you all leave with the bottom line being masculinity is a political issue. And to leave it to the politicians and to those who gain power is to surrender to masculinities, which we want changed. And that it has so many different dimensions. So there's no one blueprint and say, okay, this is how we'll deal with it. The specificity of each situation, even within the country, becomes important. And from the presentations, I find the most significant as part of a pedagogy is to be able to identify cases and go after them and do the analysis and see the linkages. With that, you will be on your own, very specific, very existential sort of a journey of understanding masculinities and addressing them in whatever way, in whatever small way, large way, through your networks, through individually. I think there's a lot of space for each one of us to work. And this whole conference is an invitation to see how we work, how we understand. We also give you an example of Sanam, and we hope I'm sure there are other examples also of how you can learn about masculinity by being together, but we focused on a geographical area which is interconnected despite the political boundaries which divide us. Okay, so but work together for gender justice will be something that will keep uniting us. So thank you again, and thank you panelists.